If you have a smart speaker, you have access to the entire world of NPR and St. Louis Public Radio. All the latest news and all the captivating stories. Activate our voices with yours by telling your smart speaker to play St. Louis Public Radio.
The GOP primary for the U.S. Senate is less than 2 months away, and major contenders like Senate President Pro Tem Dave Schatz are trying to convince Republican voters that they'd be the best candidate to take on the Democrats in November. On this episode of Politically Speaking, the Sullivan Republican takes on an array of major issues and explains why he stands out in the GOP crowd. Let's hit the music.
This is the Politically Speaking podcast, the definitive show about Missouri politics.
We have to talk about things that matter to people.
I've tried to bring that same aggressive, iconoclast style with me to the United States Senate.
I think my district is a model for the state.
We put Missourians first.
You just kind of have to find the common ground with people.
I believe that this district deserves someone who represents their values.
After I came back to St. Louis, I started thinking that I could have a bigger role on the change that I wanted to make.
And welcome to Politically Speaking. I'm your host, St. Louis Public Radio political correspondent, Jason Rosenbaum. Joining me in Jefferson City, she is St. Louis Public Radio's State House and Politics reporter,
Sarah Kellogg.
And our special guest today, he is the Senate President Pro Tem of the Missouri Senate and a candidate for Missouri's U.S. Senate seat.
Dave Schatz.
Thank you very much, Senator, for joining us today. This is kicking off an unofficial series where we're going to be talking with Republican and Democratic contenders for the soon-to-be vacant U.S. Senate seat. And we've had you on the show a few times before. Just if people haven't listened to those shows, can you just remind our listeners like what your current position is, what your district is, and what the Senate President Pro Tem actually does?
Well, that's a great question, Jason. Obviously, I'll start with the easy parts of that. I hail from Franklin County, which is the center of the 26th senatorial district, but I also have the western portions of St. Louis County, Chesterfield, Eureka, Wildwood areas is in the 26th senatorial. Obviously, the maps being redrawn will change that dynamic, but I've represented that area for the last 8 years. I think the 26 now becomes a little more Franklin County still centered, but has some Warren County as well into that in the new district. Been fortunate for the last 4 years to serve as the President Pro Tem. A lot of responsibilities comes along with that particular job, but obviously it allows me to choose the chairmans of the committees. Obviously, we are as the Pro Tem, we discuss matters when it comes to challenges to the rules. We make those determinations. We assign bills to committee. And take those bills in, get them on the calendar. And literally at the end of the day, a lot of people have described it as trying to keep frogs in a wheelbarrow. Sometimes it is very challenging dealing with all the personalities that we deal with. But at the end of the day, we keep the train on the tracks and try to get things through the process and try to help our members and also our minority members to move things through the legislature. And so I've been fortunate enough and blessed to do that for the last 4 years.
So I guess kind of we're going to move on to the job that you're running for. Why are you running to become Missouri's next U.S. Senator?
This is not something that I necessarily had sought out. It was just something, I think sometimes politics is about timing and opportunity. In Missouri with term limits, I am at the end of my 8-year term in the Missouri Senate. And when Senator Blunt announced that he was not going to seek re-election, it did come to mind something that I would be interested in. As the field of candidates began to develop, I did not see anyone necessarily that I felt like could offer what I believe Missouri needs to send to the United States Senate. And so I made the determination that I would enter into that race. I think first and foremost, as I began to work on that decision, I think about the reasons that are things that are important to me. And obviously I was blessed with 5 children. I have 8 grandchildren, 2 on the way. And I'm concerned about the future and the world that they're going to live in and grow up in. I want them to have the same opportunities that I've enjoyed in my lifetime. And I believe that I would be the right person to go to Washington, D.C. and fight for those issues and those things that are going to be important. And I think it's going to be important to my children and grandchildren far into the future. And I see that there's a number of candidates. Washington, D.C. for a long time has not been working for everyday average citizens. And I see that as a problem. And I think sending someone there with the right values, the right mindset, and for the right reasons is the reasons I'm going. I think that we have a lot of folks that are entered in this race that are looking for the next office. They've been running from one to the next and, trying to elevate themselves and find a way to get on Fox News. That's just not why I'm about going and wanting to be in Washington, D.C. I want to work for Missouri. I want to do the right things. And I'm not running for another job. And therefore, I believe I'm that right candidate. I'm a job creator. I'm a small business owner. We've got nearly probably half of the United States Senate are attorneys. We need more common sense business people like myself, the job creators of the nation, serving in the United States Senate.
You've touched on this a little bit, but how do you distinguish yourself from the other candidates that are running?
Well, I think it's pretty clear. In my last 12 years as in the Missouri legislature, I've been a small business owner. At the end of the day, at the end of the week, I go back and I run a small business. I provide jobs for over 100 families. We run a couple of different businesses. And so we're in the business of providing, jobs, for people. And I think that that's one of the distinctions that when you look at some of the candidates, there may be some business experience, but none, I don't believe, to the level that I have. Again, I think, as I stated, there's 43 attorneys in the United States Senate right now. I don't think we need any more attorneys in the United States Senate. There's a handful of small business people. I'm not sure any of them to the level of small business that actually a blue collar business like myself. And I think that is one of the things that distinguishes me between these other career seeking politicians, that they're going there. And I believe we need to send someone there like myself.
Public polling has shown that you are behind other candidates in the contest. How do you plan on moving up in the weeks ahead?
Well, obviously we've got to get our name out there. I know that we don't have the recognition that some of the folks that have ran statewide previously, and that is a challenge we face. But we're in the process of running our media and commercials are on the air waves. We intend to continue to saturate those airwaves. And hopefully, as we can develop some momentum, people will begin to know more and more about who Dave Schatz is and what he stands for and why he's the right choice for the United States Senate.
One of the key differences is that you've decided to use your own money to finance your campaign. How does that give you an advantage or a disadvantage with your chances?
Well, obviously, yes. We were able to put some resources in. Obviously, we know that it's necessary. It's a challenging process. It's unfortunate that the reality is that it requires a financial strength in order to run an effective campaign. We knew because we waited. Quite frankly, we did not enter this race early. We did not begin the process of fundraising as some candidates did right out of the gate. Because again, we were waiting to see if that field and how it would ultimately fill out. And when those candidates did not appear, there were some people that I thought may get in this race that may make it very challenging. But as those people chose not to, that's when we made the decision that we felt like there was an opportunity for someone that has a record of actually getting things done. I think if you could look over the past 4 years under my leadership in the Missouri Senate and the things we've been able to accomplish, I think that's what people are looking for. They're looking for someone that has a record of results. We can point to that. We're not just talking about it. They prefer action over just rhetoric and talk. And so we've got it. Again, we'll have to spend some resources of our own to get our message out there. We're prepared to do that. We're also raise some capital as well. And we believe that as we can move our numbers, we'll be able to attract some more investment into our campaign and bring people along for the ride.
So let's dive right into issues. The first issue that I want to talk about is the war in Ukraine. And this is going to be a disclosure preface. Whenever I talk about this issue, I am half Ukrainian. Both of my great grandparents came from Ukraine to Missouri in the 1900s, but I probably have a different perspective on this than most Ukrainian Americans, just because the Jewish experience in Ukraine was complicated, to say the least. So with that disclosure out of the way, do you support the United States continuing to give monetary and military support to Ukraine? Why or why not?
No, I believe absolutely we need to do things. Obviously, Vladimir Putin is a thug. For him to unprovoked go into the Ukraine and continue to do what he's done is obviously something that we should not be wanting to tolerate. I think we have to think very wisely as we make decisions about whether or not we would ever engage and deploy any of our American soldiers into that region. But I do believe that by providing some financial support and some resources there is necessary. Again, there are a lot of innocent people. I actually attend church. I've got some folks there that had adopted 3 children from Ukraine. They've been over there. They've been, some of those people have went back. They're helping in whatever way that they can to try to assist in this process. We're seeing, the things that are occurring over there are, it's just tragic to see what Vladimir Putin and Russia has done up to this point. And so do I think that the Ukraine has issues that need to be resolved? Absolutely. I think that they have some corruption issues in their government, but obviously right now we're seeing, again, them pull together, pull their country together and fighting for what they believe is a sovereign country. And I think we're going to have to stand in there and support them and make sure that we do it in a financial, fiscally responsible way, that the resources get to where they can be utilized in the best fashion.
And that actually parlays into my next question. Would you have voted for the $40 billion aid package that was recently signed into law?
I would say more than likely that I would have. I haven't seen all of the details. I do think that, again, there's not a perfect piece of legislation that ever gets passed in any chamber, whether it's in the Missouri Senate or the United States Congress. But as part of, whether or not we should have provided some funding, absolutely we should have. And so more than likely, I support the fundings there. There probably could have been some changes made in there that I think we would have preferred, and making sure that there were some financial constraints and making sure it gets to the right places. But at the end of the day, I probably would have supported the funding package. Again, anytime that we're not sending and deploying American troops and we'll be able to spend some resources to be able to defeat a Russian enemy, I think it's probably a good investment.
What do you make of some Republicans who are arguing that Congress should not focus on Ukraine and should focus on domestic issues?
Well, I think you have to have a balance. But if, Jason, I truly believe that if you see, some of the effects of what has occurred in our economy because of what's happening in the Ukraine, the number one industry in the state of Missouri is agriculture. The amount of effect that we've seen in the price of fertilizer a lot of fertilizer and things that is produced in the Ukraine that is shipped into the United States, we're seeing double and triple the prices of fertilizer from last year. The amount of sunflowers and sunflower oil that's produced in the Ukraine. There's a number of agriculture issues that ultimately are going to affect our economy. And so it's, it is something that we have to be aware with. Again, and so we have to take that into account strategically, all of the resources that are being produced outside of the United States, and make sure that we make our decisions, that because they're going to ultimately impact us.
Moving on to the topic of inflation. Obviously, Republicans have been very critical of how President Biden has dealt with the issue of inflation. As a senator, what policies would you pursue to help alleviate that problem?
Well, I think first and foremost, we've got to get our financial house in order. Just like we've done in the state of Missouri year after year, we balance the state's budget. We live within our means. The federal government, obviously has not learned that lesson. I think that, if they would take one thing that we could take to Washington, D.C. and show them that is one thing that's been effective. Inflation, the United States government has this, huge printing press that they continue to devalue the American dollar. But I also believe that the Biden administration's energy policy has really, had an impact on inflation. I'm a small business guy. I put a number of people in trucks every day, large trucks, to get them back and forth to work. And the cost of getting those people back and forth to work every day is skyrocketing. But that's going to have a trickle-down effect to everyone in this economy. When you go to the average individual drives up to a gas pump and it costs $150 to fill up their vehicle, that's going to have an impact on their ability to spend those resources in other places. And so Biden's energy policy is a direct result of some of the things that he took when he took office day one. And so we need to change that. We need to be energy interdependent. We need, obviously, we can work our way and migrate towards greener energy and opportunities. But again, shutting the pipeline down, doing some of the things that have led to these historic high gas prices has led a lot to the inflation that we're seeing right now.
When Republicans controlled the White House and the Senate, they passed massive spending bills to deal with the COVID-19 pandemic. Do you think that contributed to inflation issues?
Well, I think it obviously had some. Again, I think any time when we spend there is an appropriate time occasionally for the federal government to maybe have to spend in times of national disasters and emergencies, where maybe we would go beyond living, the amount of resource that we have coming in. But it should be very rare. But again, it's just become a not, everyday occurrence. Washington, D.C. is continued to live above their means, and they've become accustomed to it. And no one's willing to cut, the financial constraints and pull back in those issues. But we need to put somebody in there that's willing to do that, to make the hard decisions, fund the things that are necessary, but cut back on the things that aren't necessary.
Another reality is that demand for certain goods has skyrocketed since people started re-entering society, but supply chain issues have been fairly vexing. Is that something the government can even effectively intervene in?
Again, part of that has been policy issues that have led to some of the supply chain crises that we've seen. When we went out, we paid some people to stay home. Obviously, getting people back into the workforce has been a challenge. Businesses, have cut down on shifts and the ability to be able to produce the amount of goods. Obviously, we rely heavily on things that are imported into the United States, whether it's computer chips and things that the car manufacturing industry have seen. Those same type of electronics affect the equipment industry and things. And so we're seeing this shortage of availability of these types of products. We're also seeing concerns. Again, there may be some serious concerns when it comes to being able to get products moved across this country. One thing about Missouri, just briefly, we are the distribution hub of the United States. And whenever we see the cost of fuel skyrocketing and stuff, it's going to be challenged to be able to move products, throughout this country and get them there in a timely manner. And so all of that being combined is part of what's led us to the debacle that we're in right now.
Moving on to abortion rights, you were president of the Missouri Senate when the state enacted legislation that would ban most abortions if Roe versus Wade is overturned. It had other things in it, but obviously that trigger law is getting a lot of attention after the Politico draft leak. Some Democrats in Congress want to pass legislation to enshrine the right to an abortion in every state. What would be your posture if you're in the United States Senate?
No, I believe that I think Missouri got it right. I think that when we enacted, what I would consider to be some of the strongest pro-life legislation in the nation, when we put a trigger mechanism in place, for me personally, I am someone who believes that life begins at conception. And so I support ending abortion in this state. I think that if given the opportunity to continue to support that position in Washington, D.C., I'll take that same position.
The trigger law does not make any exceptions for women who become pregnant because of rape or incest. And there has been some conjecture that is a bridge too far for voters, even people that do not like the concept of abortion. What would you make of the criticism of the lack of exceptions?
I think that from my perspective, obviously, again, I've never, from a faith perspective, I don't believe that making two mistakes makes nothing right. And so, again, it's unfortunate that these situations occur, by choosing to end someone's life is not, an acceptable process. And so, again, my faith and my belief does not allow me to believe that anything that, again, as I said, life begins at conception. I know it's a challenging issue for some. And again, I think that that is a conversation that will continue on. If that is, if we truly see if the Supreme Court ruling does come down, as we have been somewhat leaked information, if that is the case, and then we'll be having these conversations, I believe, at a statewide level into the future.
How do you think this issue will affect the general election? There's been some conjecture that it'll energize female voters everywhere, while voters who oppose abortion rights may be complacent. What do you think?
I think people are passionate on both sides of this issue, and so I'm not sure it gives anyone any particular advantage one way or the other. If this becomes an issue, but I think that it's been probably one of the most divisive issues in my lifetime. Since Roe versus Wade became effective, it's been an ongoing conversation, and I think matters of life will always rise to that occasion. So I think that regardless of which side of the issue you're on, you're very passionate in what you believe.
We'll be back after this quick break with more Politically Speaking with Senate President Pro Tem Dave Schatz.
The Gateway brings you the day's news each weekday from around the St. Louis region and the state capitals in Jefferson City.
Our schools are accredited. We don't need this bill.
And Springfield.
How many more years must pass before lawmakers see time is of the essence?
I'm Abby Larico. Join me each weekday for The Gateway on the STLPR app or wherever you get podcasts.
And we're back on Politically Speaking with Senate President Pro Tem Dave Schatz. He is a candidate for the U.S. Senate and also a Republican state senator from Franklin County. I want to move on to gun rights because obviously that's a major issue, even when it isn't in the national consciousness like it is now. But I have often found that this is an issue that will energize voters one way or the other. Are there any restrictions on guns that you would be amenable to if this issue comes up while you're a United States senator?
Jason, we would have to look very closely at what those issues are. Obviously, this is a very challenging subject right now. I mean, what we've seen in tragic circumstances over the last few weeks and what's occurred is terrible. But again, at the end of the day, it's not the weapon that is the problem. It is a matter of whether or not it is a mental health issue. If it's issues, obviously, that a matter of the heart, I believe, that are ultimately driving people to make some of these decisions. And so I don't believe it's the issue. It's because of the gun. It's because there's something wrong with the individual. So I have strongly supported the Second Amendment right. I believe in the right of individuals, to defend themselves. And again, any time we would have a conversation of prohibiting someone from doing that, I think would be a serious conversation as to whether or not what they would be proposing.
I want to follow up on the mental health point, because I think that has been something that Republicans have brought up, and frankly, Democrats have too. But I've seen some advocates for certain types of mental health diagnoses really push back against this idea that if you have some sort of mental health issue, then you shouldn't have access to a gun. Because if you make that sort of blanket declaration, it's not only a Second Amendment issue, that's a 14th Amendment equal protection issue, especially if the mental health diagnosis does not actually link to a violent incident. So I'd like you to address that point, because that's been getting a lot of pushback from actually a pretty diverse group of political people.
Yeah, and I believe it. Again, it is a challenging subject. I do think that the individuals that we've seen some of these horrific acts that have occurred have to have some mental problems that they're experiencing at the time when these things occur. But to say that we can categorize anyone with a mental illness as someone that's not fit to be able to defend themselves or own a firearm, I don't think that we can do that. It would be a very slippery slope if we were to go down that path. I'm not sure what is the appropriate measures when we talk about people with mental health issues, but I would be fearful that it would be used, as a tool potentially to harm individuals. And so we've seen circumstances where there are people that obviously relationships end. They may claim someone has a mental health issue in order to prohibit them from being able to enjoy, their livelihood and protecting themselves. So I'm a little concerned, again, of how we could implement something when it comes to mental health as to whether someone should be able to possess or own a firearm. It will be a very challenging process if that's something that becomes part of the conversation.
Missouri passed a law under your tenure that would fine police departments that enforce federal gun laws that are not already on the books in the state. Some have said this bill makes the state less safe. What do you say to that?
I don't know that you can directly attribute it to that it makes this state less safe. Again, I think that at the end of the day, the SAPA legislation that was passed was obviously put into place for a basic protection to say that, no law enforcement agency shall engage in the unlawful taking of a weapon from a Missouri citizen. That would be mandated by the federal government or by some executive order. On its face, I believe strongly that is the right approach, that we should not have the federal government coming in, Missourians, and having our law enforcement cooperating with federal agencies to take away the law-abiding citizens' right to protect themselves and defend themselves. Whether that in particular, you could point specifically to whether that's made us unsafe. I think the things that's made us unsafe is the lack of prosecution in our state. We've seen prosecutors in a number of areas, obviously unwilling to prosecute criminals. I think at the end of the day, we need to be focusing on upholding the law, making sure that we're holding people accountable and putting criminals in jail. That would be the most effective. Now, there may be some challenges with the legislation, but if anyone in law enforcement that worked with me during the time when we were negotiating the SAPA, obviously I engaged with them on a routine basis. They were in my office. We talked about the effects of this, and ultimately at the end of the day, they agreed that when that legislation moved forward, that they were okay with it moving forward because of the modifications and changes that we were trying to bring to the table at that time. They were satisfied. Again, like I said, there's never a perfect piece of legislation that's ever passed. But if there's some changes that need to be looked at, law enforcement probably should engage in bringing those issues to the legislature and trying to make some changes going into the future.
One issue that seems to be gaining some traction is a so-called red flag law, which would create a judicial process to remove firearms from someone who is clearly a danger to others. What do you think of that policy?
Well, again, I think that is a slippery slope. I believe that would be weaponized against people at any given time. And so I'm probably very concerned about, implementing any kind of a red flag law where ultimately at the end of the day, it would be misused and abused.
What about background checks? Would that prevent guns from being sold to people who forfeited the rights to own one?
I probably need to understand in what context. I believe that obviously we do have background checks when you purchase a weapon. There are background checks that obviously you go through the NICS system, and ultimately, those purchases are covered from that perspective. And so, I believe we currently have a system that does that.
Let's move on to transportation policy, because that's something that's been your bailiwick. I don't know if that's the right word, but I'll allow it for myself.
Sure.
What would you do as a U.S. Senator to kind of further Missouri's transportation infrastructure?
Well, one of the things, obviously, I can tell you from my experience of working with Senator Blunt, when we were able to pass a bonding proposal here in the state, there was a mechanism in there that required us to receive federal funding. And in the amount, we put a trigger amount that unless we received a certain amount of money, that bonding proposal would not move forward. And I've seen firsthand how important it was to have someone in Washington, D.C. that was willing to fight for transportation funding. Not only did Senator Blunt exceed the amount that we had put before him in need, to ultimately to rebuild the Rocheport Bridge on I-70, a very critical thoroughfare for the infrastructure and transportation issues. But Senator Blunt was able to bring home far and above, the resources necessary to accomplish that bridge, but also to build the Buckle Neal Bridge in Kansas City. Those needing someone there in Washington, D.C. that's willing to go in, have the ability to fight for those resources and understand how important those resources are to our state, but also to the national economy. Shutting down I-70 and repairing a bridge that was proposed would have been catastrophic to manufacturing and people and times. We're able to build a new bridge right beside the one that's there ultimately at the end of the day. But that's the partnership. But having someone in DC that's passionate about transportation, understands how valuable it is. And that's why I believe I'm the right person. It's not been no secret. I've been passionate about transportation funding my entire career in 12 years in the legislature. I'll be as passionate in Washington, D.C. about doing the things I think government should do. And infrastructure is one of the core functions that the federal government should be engaged in.
If there's any main source of criticism that's been lobbed at you during this campaign, also just during the legislature this year, it's your support of a gas tax increase that passed the legislature and was signed into law. Why was this a good thing, especially since Republicans typically rail against tax increases?
Well, but the one thing that people get lost in the weeds is this. This was part of a negotiated package. When we passed the gas tax, we obviously passed the Wayfair issue as well, which was included in it. It was an income tax cut. In my time in the legislature, we have passed, personal income tax, reduced personal income tax by 20%. We've taken some of that investment and we put it back in infrastructure. It is clear that for 100 years we have been paying for our roads and bridges through the motor fuel user fee. We have not addressed it for 26 years. I'm a business person, and I'm about solving problems. At the end of the day, that's what I think people are looking for. I could have not have, in good faith and good conscience, left the Missouri legislature with one of the biggest problems facing our state was being able to fund transportation needs. And so by passing Senate Bill 262, we addressed something that hadn't been done for 26 years. And we did it with a majority support of Republicans in the House and a bipartisan support in the Senate, and the governor, lieutenant governor supported this. I know that it's one of these things very challenging for individuals, but at the end of the day, you cannot ignore problems and you can't wait for the next election cycle to address those. And so I'm not someone that's run away from those issues. I've embraced them and I solve problems. I'll solve the same problems if I'm elected to Washington, D.C., and do the same thing. I'll take on the tough issues. I'll guarantee you that there's probably not a candidate in this race that would want to take on this tough issue, but I'm a candidate that has.
Well, let's in our final topic, let's talk about like one of the toughest issues that's afflicting Missouri and America today, and that's race relations. What would you do as a U.S. Senator to bridge societal and governmental divides between the government and Black people?
Jason, that's a challenge. I'm not sure that I have a great answer for that. Obviously, we need to continue to work on bringing people together. We need unity for all people. Obviously, we've had a breakdown in relationships with law enforcement in the process. One thing we need to do, and I've been an advocate and a champion for, was finding and getting the necessary training and resources for officers, making sure we have quality people doing the job, and that is key. Making sure that those individuals interact, with the public in the right way. And that comes by having well-trained, qualified people to do those jobs. And so that's been something that I've been concerned about and have worked on in my time in the legislature. How the federal government could improve those, I'm not sure exactly. But at the end of the day, it comes down to the local neighborhood, the local municipality, and how that they ultimately interact with their constituents and their folks. And those are going to be on a smaller level. We can do things at the state and federal level. But again, at the end of the day, it comes down to closer to where those people reside.
And that was going to be my final question to you. Do you even think that the federal government has a role in fostering a better relationship between law enforcement and African Americans, or is it really a state and local issue?
Well, I think that there may be some things at a federal level that make sense. But again, I've seen the federal government mess up a lot of things. I'm not sure that this is an area that they can ultimately prevail in, but I do think it's a local issue more than likely. But again, they can create and foster an environment that tries to help those local areas begin to develop and build those bridges necessary. But again, it's probably more suited either on a local issue or state's issue than it is a federal issue.
Well, Senator, thank you so much for providing a lot of your time to talk about the big issues that are afflicting the state and country. Politically Speaking is a product of St. Louis Public Radio, which is part of the University of Missouri St. Louis. You can find all of our stories at stlpr.org. You can follow me on Twitter at @Rosenbaum. Sarah, how can people follow you on Twitter?
They can follow me on Twitter at Sarah K. Kellogg. That's 2 L's, 2 G's.
And Senator, how can people find out more about your campaign, either through social media or the World Wide Web?
Dave Schatz for Senate. That's where they can find information for us.
We'll be back next time. And until then, so long.